Alright, so this is my interview nightmares part 2. It was such a crazy interview that I decided that I needed to make an entire video about this instead of just giving you a 1-minute snippet of what happened to me. So, if you watched part 1 or if you haven't seen it already, go and watch that little short video I made about my interview nightmares part 1. So, here we go. In an effort to improve myself and get better at going to interviews, I'm going to put myself out there and tell you what this experience was like. So, as I mentioned before, I went to this interview and that was part 1, and basically the guy, the owner, the CEO, this very, very famous guy here in New York City, a lawyer, was asking me how personal I had been with my job. And while I found the question a little bit strange, I was using my innocence goggles and I was answering them as adamantly as I could. I mentioned that I had planned, anniversaries, birthday parties, doctor's appointments, like colonoscopy appointments. How much more personal can it get than that? But he insisted on asking me how personal I was, so I basically stated, well, I was so personal with my previous employer that I knew about, and again, he couldn't tell which employer I was talking about because there's many people that I worked for in the past on the resume. I didn't specify who I was talking about. So I basically stated, well, it was so personal that I knew about his wife and his family and children. I knew about other people he was in close relationships with. So the interview went on. He asked me a few more questions, and at this point I basically turned red and I was like, I don't want to tell this guy this. I'm like, because that's like me giving up secrets. But I thought to myself, I was like, well, at least he didn't know who I was talking about. Anyway, remember, this is an effort to make myself better. So if you guys have any comments or any previous experience with interviews that went in this direction, please let me know how I could have handled it better in the comments below. Because again, I am trying to get better at this. So I end up leaving the interview. A couple days go by. I call the headhunter and I ask her, hey, did you hear anything? How did it go? And she says to me, I don't think it went really well, Adelise. I think you should just keep looking. So I said, okay. Couple hours later, I get a call back from the headhunter and she's like, the guy wants you back. He wants to ask you another interview. So I'm like, oh, wow, okay. I'm like, so now after spending 4 or 5 days literally rethinking every single damn thing I said in this interview and seeing what I could have done right and what I could have possibly done wrong and how it could get better, I show up at this interview. Now, I've mentioned that previously he was late before. This time, he's an hour and a half late for the interview. And I'm like, you know what? I get it. He doesn't have a personal assistant yet. He doesn't have someone who can help him manage his schedule. This might be why this is happening. So I stay. But would you have stayed if a person was late for the 3rd time for over an hour? Would you have stayed? Please let me know in the comments below. Or did I just allow this guy to totally disrespect me? Anyway, and maybe I should have just put my foot down there. Here we go. I go to the next interview, and instead of getting interviewed by him, I'm interviewed by one of his oldest employees that he's had for over 15 years. And I'm like, okay, I understand. At this point, I've been interviewed about 12 times by 6 or 7 people in the company, as well as him, 3 occasions already. And now I'm coming to this one again. And he's over an hour and a half late. Now I get to meet with him again. And this time he decides it's going to be him and the lady who has been working with him for over 15 years. And he just out the gate says, I like you, Adelise. I want to hire you. I'm going to give you this job, but I have a question for you. And I'm like, okay, shoot. He goes, why did you tell me about your previous employer's indiscretions? And I'm like, oh, is that why you were on the fence about hiring me? He goes, yes, because if you could tell me your previous boss's life story, that means you're going to go walking around talking about my life. And I'm like, yeah, but you didn't know who I was speaking about, and you were the one persisted to know how personal I was with my previous employer. So now I'm sitting there, and in my mind, I don't really have a lot of time to think, obviously, because I have to answer this question. But in my mind, I'm like, what the did you mean by personal? Did you mean like, did I sit on his like, what did you mean by that? You were the one asking. But anyway, I don't have any time to think about that. I have to answer this guy's question. So I said to him, well, I wanted you to realize that I could be very personal with my employer and that I could help with many, many facets of his needs, considering that I am applying for a personal assistant, executive assistant position. Anyway, the interview goes on and he says that he still can't hire me because he needs references. And the 2 that I gave him were not enough. He needs more references. So I don't really have any more references, and that's the sad part about being the executive assistant at the previous place I was at for so many years, because I was basically the top of the crop and I didn't answer to a lot of other people. So I think to myself, who could I get this guy? So I give him 1 more reference, and well, 2 more references actually, because that's what he wanted, 2 more. So 4 was what he wanted. And basically I go home and I wait to see if my references will, you know, help me get the job. We're not going to talk about how bad that got, but let's just say I did not get the job because one of my references decided to say that I used to work for them while I worked for my employer, which is a total conflict of interest. I don't need any advice on that. That I know. But tell me, if a person continues to interview you and ask you wild questions like, how personal have you been with your previous employer? How would you have answered that? And how could I have done better? And should I have walked out after him being late, not once, not twice, but 3 times for over an hour? I don't know, guys. Help me out here. I'll keep on keeping you guys abreast of what's going on with all of my interviews. I did most recently have another one, but I'm not going to talk about that one in this video. Help me out, guys. Help me out. Anyway, ciao bacalao for now.